Okay. So one quick note for the students. So for the last two talks, since the semester is ending, you should submit your summary by December 12th. And yeah, because otherwise then the semester is over. And so today's speaker is Dr. Kimberly Ferguson Walter, and she's a senior research scientist in the Laboratory for Advanced Cybersecurity Research. So her research interests are focused on the intersection between computer security, artificial intelligence, and human behavior. And for this talk in particular, she will talk about user study they conducted to understand how to deceive attackers. Okay.
All right. Thanks for having me. Happy to talk to you guys. Trying to figure out how to minimize my, I can only see part of my slides. Let me see. Sorry about, I can't see my cursor for some reason. Okay, here we go. Fixing it. Here we go. All right. So it's the outline of the talk. We'll skip over it. So malicious actors in cyberspace have a very large range of potential targets, and their attacks can result in everything from a loss of privacy to a loss of productivity, a loss of operational security, and especially in military, potential loss of life. So how can we stop or disrupt cyber attacks? There's a lot of research going on in this. People take different strategies for this. Our research is focused on disrupting the cyber operator behind the attack. So we're just focused on the human behind the attack. One way to do this is a concept called cyber deception. So the motivation behind this is to rebalance the asymmetric relationship of the cyber attacker and cyber defender. So right now, it's easier to attack than it is to defend. Cyber defenders must protect everywhere all the time, and cyber attackers only need to find one way in. But the defenders aren't leveraging their home field advantage. But perimeter monitoring is not sufficient. So this is your, intrusion detection system and your firewall, trying to keep, build a wall on the outside of your castle to keep them out. It's not sufficient. Somebody's going to get in. So what do you do when they're inside? So we think cyber deception is a good way to deal with this. Why is that? Well, because deception can impact the decision-making of the attacker. So we're not just talking about stopping or detecting network movement. You can actually change the attacker's judgments and their reactions, and this can have longer-term effects. So as a government researcher, one of our goals is to make sure that our research focuses in areas that aren't adequately covered in academia or industry. And so one of the areas that we're focused on is trying to help fill this current gap in rigorous scientific experimental evaluation in cybersecurity. And so I'm going to be talking about a cyber deception experiment. And this research is inherently multidisciplinary, and human subject research is essential. So you can't really simulate how a person would be affected by deception just using computers with no people involved. Users are at the center of our IT networks, and predicting their reactions is difficult, but it's vital to understand human decisions. So we need to think about attacker cognition and how we disrupt attackers today has cognitive implications. Work that's been done on cyber deception for years has shown the importance of this attacker cognition. So we've been able to distract attackers from real assets and content, which slows even a persistent attacker. can provide incorrect understanding of a network topology, which can waste attacker resources. We can create confusion and frustration, which can increase human error and fatigue. But there can be more to it than that. So one of the areas of computer science is human-computer interaction, HCI. There's a lot of psychologists involved in an area called human factors. And so they're working on how to make people more effective and more efficient at their jobs. And so when they come into the computer world, they're looking at usability and improving performance. But attackers should not expect or receive good usability. So we pitched this new concept of what we're calling oppositional human factors. And this is the use of the human factors theory, technique, practice, all that good work that's been going on. But we flip it on its head, right? We do the reverse. We use it to actually disrupt the ability of a malicious actor to use, understand, and interact with systems. So this can go beyond cyber deception to use other kinds of techniques to disrupt cyber attackers on the systems we own that we're trying to protect. But today we're going to focus on cyber deception. Cyber deception is a growing field. SPAF's worked on it for, I would say, decades. There's a couple of textbooks out there now. There's lots of different examples of different types of technologies, honeypots, deceptive content, false network topologies, fake honeypots, tar pitting, honey patches, and decoy systems. So decoy systems is what I'm going to be talking about as part of our experiment today. And so what decoy systems do is they are inside your perimeter. So they are interspersed amongst your real machines, and they are designed to look real from network reconnaissance or scanning behavior. So it looks like you have way more machines than you do, and the attacker can't tell what's real and what's not from the outside. So it confuses, distracts, dissuades, causes doubts, and slows the attacker. But the defender knows what's real. And so for them, it makes things easier. It increases early detection of attacker activity and helps protect critical systems. And if you did have a honeypot or a high fidelity machine or a quarantine area, you could use interaction with a decoy to redirect a attacker from a decoy to a honeypot. Honeypots tend to be the kind of cyber deception that people have heard most about. The terminology is a little up for debate, so I'm just going to give you my opinion here so that you know what I'm talking about. So when I say decoys, I mean something different than traditional honeypots. Honeypots tend to be high fidelity. They tend to be, the purpose tends to be to draw somebody to the honeypot. Usually you want to get somebody to go inside the honeypot, and the honeypots tend to be designed to be very realistic, and because you want to watch what somebody's doing inside that honeypot machine, and you're trying to gather intelligence or information about the attacker's behavior, and also waste their time inside the honeypot. And at the same time, while they're in the honeypot, they're not attacking one of the real machines. So you're drawing them away from the real machines or away from the real network into the honeypot. And it's this, it takes it painstakingly amount of time to configure a honeypot to be realistic. You have to look at, do I have enough fake browser history to make it look like a real users were actually on here? And did I make sure that then not all the fake files have the same timestamp, because that would make it look like it was all, just designed yesterday or but But so decoys can be a little different. So honeypots were originally designed to be outside your network, far away, and they draw people away from your real network over to the honeypot. They can have some different uses nowadays, but decoys assume the attacker knows the location of the real network, and in fact, that they already can breach your perimeter defenses. The decoys are interspersed amongst your real machines, and they're lightweight, so they have easy, quick reconfiguration and upkeep. Decoys can also provide an incorrect belief of the true topology of the network. So like if you had a network that was all Windows 10 machines, well, you could put some decoys in there that make it look like well, my attack surface isn't really that easy. I actually have all these different operating systems, right? So you can change what the attack surface looks like to the attacker. And identifying one decoy doesn't help avoid the others. So just because the attacker, figures out one decoy is, hey, that machine is only skin deep, I figured out something wacky's going on with it, it doesn't actually help them figure out which of the other machines is real or fake. While if you figure out the thing you're in is a honeypot, you pretty much leave and go on to attacking wherever you think the real machines are. So a little bit of a difference in my mind. So now we're going to talk about the effectiveness of decoy systems. Should check my time. So attackers only know what is perceived through observation, right? They're not really there. So reconnaissance is a big part. It's like the first step in attacker activity. And that's really where the decoys shine, because they look real in that initial scanning reconnaissance activity. And computers currently unintentionally reveal to an attacker more information than we as defenders would like. So deception really comes in to provide them with the information we might wish them to know. So this may not be true information. What information can we provide to them that helps us have better defensive posture? There's been lots of theorized benefits. We can distract attackers from real assets and content, cause confusion and frustration for attackers, disrupting progress, force attackers to take additional action, thus increasing the risk of revealing themselves and delaying forward progress, provide an incorrect understanding of the true network topology, and use any attempt to access a decoy as a high confidence tripwire alert. This one's really important. This is one that network defenders really care about, because much of their current tools, they give them alerts to anomalous or malicious activity, but a lot of them are not high confidence. So they get so many alerts that they have to track down. And so to get something that's a high confidence alert, so if you're able to deploy it in a way such that only a malicious actor would interact with a decoy, and so the only reason you would get an alert is if there's something that a defender really needs or an incident responder really needs to chase down, that's a really big win. But there's an additional theorized benefit that's never really been that closely examined experimentally. And that's how effective is this kind of technique if its presence is, if the attacker is aware of its presence. So that's something that we're going to examine and talk about today, among some of the other points. So we started with a pilot study back in around 2015. We had a 3-person professional red team, and they worked as a team for 4 phases. Each phase was about 6 months apart. We collected a bunch of data, transcripts of the talk aloud protocol, keystroke data, network capture, alerts from the decoys, and some questionnaires. And we deployed the decoy system on a live operational network. Subjects were asked to think aloud and explain their actions, thoughts, strategies, all of which were recorded. And if you guys have questions, I can't actually see the chat log, but I'm told that someone is monitoring it. So if you guys have questions or need clarifications, feel free to ask. I don't mind stopping. So they were given basic instructions to recon the network, define its topology, and locate an exfil content of interest. And then in later phases, we asked them to identify what they thought was real and what they thought was fake. So in phase 1, they don't know anything about deception being there and decoys being there. And we really just want to know, will the decoys fool an attacker? Are they realistic enough? And the answer was yes. So even though decoys only made up 19% of the assets, 83% of the exploits were launched against the decoys. This was because the decoys were designed to look like a wide variety of things. So the decoys looked more vulnerable, less vulnerable, and all in the middle. And so they were picking the most vulnerable things on the network and they were attacking them first. No surprise there. Phase 2, we had them come back. This time we told them, hey, you know, there were decoys on the network. You know, we fooled you. You didn't see them. This time they know about the decoys. So do decoys fool an attacker who knows deception's being used? So interestingly, this time they avoided the most vulnerable looking machines. So at the time, phase 1, they went after Windows XP. Phase 2, they avoided all the Windows XP machines, went after Windows 7. So we got thinking this could potentially help protect real vulnerable machines, right? Sometimes you can't patch or upgrade machines for some reason, you need a creative way to protect it. So we got some quotes from the red team here. So they said, legacy OS, right? What would be the only reason to have one on the network? HoneyNet. So we got to thinking, maybe the idea of deception is enough to influence attacker behavior. So could that help protect the real vulnerable machines? So we had them come back for phase 3. We let them believe that decoys were on the network, but we did not put the decoy system on the network. But they were convinced it was there. They looked for assets that had different or unusual behaviors, and they assumed they were fake, but everything was real. So they saw deception where deception wasn't there. And they were very confident in their determination. I know that one is fake, so I'm not even going to bother with it. So any odd behavior they saw, they would chalk up to the deception. And then phase 4, we actually gave them the user guide for the decoy system to see, well, if they know more technical details, will it still work? And it did. In a way. So interestingly, they now knew exactly what triggered an alert. So they were able to avoid being detected, but the way they avoid being detected was to never send a single packet on the network. So they had to revert to older and slower tactics like passive recon and social engineering. And for a defender, that's a win. Sometimes that's the best you can get, right? Is to make them go slower, is to make them take away their best and fanciest tools. I asked them to go ahead and do some scanning to see if with the added information, if they could identify real from fake, and they couldn't. So it didn't actually help them identify the decoys either. So you can see this quote here. Yeah, I'm pretty confident. I'm medium confident. I think it's 50-50, but I'm kind of on high alert. So it made them more paranoid. So this was our pilot study. We also saw several cognitive biases. So we saw a framing effect. So in the beginning, before they knew about deception, they were very interested in trying to exploit some of the printers. But then further on in the phases after they learned about the deception, you can see this quote, oh, I have a printer here. Do we care about printers? I remember the day when we used to. So the framing effect is basically about when you're presented with the same information in different ways that you see it differently. So we see that clearly. We saw tunneling behavior. So they spent significantly more time attempting to find indicators that systems are fake instead of their primary task of exfilling data. So they got sidetracked, right? And they knew it. So instead of just targeting the most interesting assets, we actually spent time comparing them. And then anchoring. So anchoring, sort of like perseverating on a piece of information. One operator continued to insist that a machine was an impressive fake and continued to work on it. So this is a case where there were no decoys. So this was a real machine. he was calling an impressive fake. Let me finish poking and prodding at these servers that I know are fake. So not only was it real instead of an impressive fake, but if he thought it was fake, why was he continuing to poke and prod at it? It wasn't getting him to his goal. So these were just observational findings from a pilot study, and they were not statistically significant, right? We had an N of 3. We only had 3 people here. But we thought that there was enough interesting findings here that it warranted a larger study. And so this is our main study. It's called the Tularosa experiment. We hired 138 professional red teamers from industry. We had 4 different conditions. So this is a little different from our pilot. So people are now only in one condition instead of being in all 4 phases. And we now have a separate control condition. So we have a case where people are just, where there are no decoys and they don't know anything about deception. We're only going to talk about day 1 today. We have a case where decoys are present, but the subjects don't know about them. We have the case where the decoys are present and the subjects are told deception may be present. And then we have the psychological deception condition, as I like to call it, where there are no decoys, but the subjects are told that deception may be present. So we have around 30 people per condition. And the setup looks the same, similar otherwise, except people are now working individually instead of teams. And they're now on a simulated network instead of an operational network. This is so that everyone can be provided with the same identical network and the same attack surface. So we can compare participants exactly to get more exact results. So the data, we have keystroke data, network data, we have attack client laptops. So everyone's provided with the same tools. So they are all given Kali Linux. And now instead of doing talk aloud, we have people reporting via the computer. So we have real-time reporting via a chat client, and then we have post-exercise reporting. And this is because we have more than one person in the room at a time and they're not working together. So we don't want them to bias each other by talking aloud. We also had a voluntary portion that was had to go through IRB approval, and this collected physiological data, demographic and experience data, personality data, and we did some cognitive tests, including memory and intelligence.
So I'm sorry, I see a question, so maybe
yeah,
I can put it. I can tell you now. So where was the attack team from, and how did they pick them?
So the attack, these were different. They were subcontractors from all different companies.
I see. Okay, I got it. But they say that the question was regarding the pilot team.
Oh, the pilot team was from a defense contractor.
Okay. Okay, cool. Thank you.
So just a quick comparison of the studies. So the Tularosa study has a lot more people in it, so we're going to get some good results that show us some statistical findings. But they were working as individuals, which isn't as realistic. They were working on a simulated network, which isn't as realistic. There were different subjects per condition, which is better because you don't have a learning effect across conditions. They didn't do think aloud a protocol with one-on-one observers, which isn't as good, but that was the best we could do. And we have a lot more subjects. We had experts on both, which is amazing. That's really hard to get. We had to provide them with standardized laptops and tools in order to be able to compare, which gives us better internal validity, but jeopardizes a little external validity. So it's not as realistic because they're not using their normal tools. And in both cases, we're looking really at a 1 to 2 day campaign, which is less time than they would have to do this in the real world. So this is just a list of the individual measures. The blue ones are the ones that are considered human subjects research, so they're voluntary. We're not going to go through them in detail. So here are some of the results. So over 65% of them had bachelor's degrees or higher. Over 70% reported working in teams of 2 or more regularly. And over 50% report that their usual engagements were a week or more. So characterizing the red team population. So this is those HSR surveys and questionnaires that they took, and then comparing them to a generalized population of the data set that had been previously published. We did see statistically significant results. So it's deemed statistically significant if the p-value is less than 0.05. So we saw that this population was more rational in their decision-making style, was less avoidant, less spontaneous, had a higher need for cognition, was less indecisive, higher agreeableness, higher conscientiousness, a lower neuroticism, and a faster reaction time. So this is interesting. I haven't seen anything in the literature characterizing the red team population before. Of course, in our case, we're really using this population as a stand-in for unauthorized attackers. These are, but they're not the same population, right? So some of these characteristics are going to be similar, maybe more rational decision-making style. But some of these characteristics are going to be very different, perhaps this predilection towards trust and compliance. So it's something to think about. So here's a list of the cyber task data that we collected. So we have NetFlow, PCAP, we have the Kali commands, the exploits, decoy alerts, and then we're able to derive some more data from what we have. And then these are the hypotheses we were looking at. So hypothesis 1, cyber and psychological deception impedes attackers. Cyber hypothesis 2, cyber deception tools are effective even if an attacker is aware of their use. Hypothesis 3, cyber deception is effective even if the attacker merely believes that a tool may be in use, even when it's not. Hypothesis 4, cyber and psychological deception impacts the attacker's cognitive and emotional state. And hypothesis 5, cognitive biases are prevalent in cyber attacker behaviors and can be induced to disrupt attacks. So we're going to look at some of the results. So the first thing we have to do is look at what are our performance measures. So we decided that we didn't want to do a capture the flag activity, so that we didn't have any flags in our simulated network. We thought that would incorrectly bias their behavior into looking for flags rather than showing their intrinsic motivation, which is what we were trying to measure. So we had to come up with our own measures of success. So we looked at a variety of things, including forward progress, self-reported success, useful reconnaissance, detection evasion, wasted resources, and cognitive state. And then we want to look at which of the conditions has which experimental manipulation, so which of the conditions has been most affected in each of these cases. So which is most different from the control condition. So this first example shows the average number of commands sent to the decoys. So this is an example of the technical effectiveness of the decoys, because we can see that when the decoys are present, there are fewer machines targeted, fewer real machines targeted. So this makes sense, right? So if there are decoys in the environment, Some of the attacks are going to go to decoys, which leaves less effort to be had on the real machines. But it's always good to back up those kinds of assumptions with data. And then we're able to put a number on it. So we saw, 710 wasted commands as calculated by specifically commands that had a IP address of a decoy in it. So it's going to be far greater than that number. And then, so this supports hypothesis one, that the condition where decoys were present had impeded forward progress. And then we see a similar pattern with the average number of megabytes sent to the decoys. We saw over 10 gigabytes of wasted resources on the decoys. And again, supports hypothesis one, impeded forward progress. But we can start to talk about some more complex cases. So here is the Eternal Blue exploit. This was a popular exploit for a vulnerability that came out the year of the study. And this happens to be the one that was most often launched by the participants during the study. So what you see in the bottom right is the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain. It talks about sort of the various stages of a cyber attack. And so this is one measure of forward progress. How far do you get in the cyber kill chain? Of course, it's kind of cyclical because you can do this on multiple machines, but talk about that a little more later. But so we're going to start with weaponization. So we were able to show that so Metasploit was the main tool that they were using to throw their exploits in Kali Linux. And we were able to see them loading the Eternal Blue module to launch the exploit. And we saw that there were significantly more of that in the absent condition than the present condition. So in the weaponization stage, and then in the delivery stage, we're able to see that in a different data source. So with the intrusion detection logs, with the Sericata alerts, we see the Eternal Blue attempts detected. We're able to see that there were more in the absent condition. So not only did the absent condition, those who did not have decoys, weaponize this specific exploit more often, but they also delivered it more often. And then for the exploitation phase, we saw in their self-reports a trend. So this is not significant. So, but it's a trend that they reported exploit successes of Eternal Blue more often. So it's not just one data point that says that those without decoys had more forward progress on this exploit. It's several across the cyber kill chain. And so it's a pretty good story that shows that the decoys impeded forward progress for those that had decoys in their condition, especially for this specific exploit, which was the most popular exploit used in this study. So you can see many of these kinds of stories pieced together. So the next one we'll talk about is target selection. So for the weaponization, we saw the number of decoys that were targeted in the present informed condition was significantly more than the numbers targeted in the present uninformed condition with the special rhost command that they use in Metasploit. This is particularly interesting because this is comparing the two different conditions where decoys were there. And the difference is whether they were told about deception or not. And it's the opposite of what you would think. So the people who were told that decoys were there targeted more decoys than the people who didn't know they were there. So this helps support hypothesis 2, that shows that actually the people who had decoys there but knew about deception did worse than the people who had decoys there and didn't know about deception. So being told about deception didn't actually hurt the effectiveness of the tool. So for privilege escalation and lateral movement, we saw something similar with the stolen domain credentials, where fewer participants in the present informed condition used the stolen domain credentials. So again, the present informed condition, where there were decoys and they knew about it, did the worst as far as using stolen credentials compared to the present uninformed. So we have a whole bunch of examples. I'm not going to go through them all, but I just wanted to give you a flavor. We're hoping to have a paper come out on this very soon. Here's another example. Let me look at my time. I'm running out of time. So this shows again that the present uninformed condition progress further in the kill chain than the present informed condition when you look at the decoy alerts. So that's interesting. So here's some more evidence that the hypothesis 2, which is our hypothesis that talks about the knowledge of deception not making it less effective, at least in the case of decoys. Hypothesis 3 is our psychological deception case. We didn't see any strong statistical data for this, but we did see strong observational data. For example, this quote from somebody in the absent informed condition. So they didn't have any decoys in their condition, but they were told deception might be there. And in the end, they said this network was filled with deception, and I spent the majority of the day going down rabbit holes that led me nowhere. You can ask me more about that if you want in the end. So we're going to talk about hypothesis 4 a little bit, which is about cognitive state and altered perception. So this is a self-reported failure. And so what we're going to look at is the absent uninformed upper left and bottom right. So absent uninformed is the control condition. And we look at the big yellow slice, that's like 3/4, it's about 70%. That's the people that are reporting success at the end of the day. They feel pretty good about how they did. And that's not surprising because the control condition had the easiest task and they really did progress the best. But what is surprising is the present informed group has the next biggest slice of success when they actually performed the worst. They had the hardest time. And so what's happening here, what we believe is happening, is that we think that this is consistent with what's called the self-serving bias, where people are more likely to blame something else for failures. And so we think because they were told about deception and because they experienced problems caused by deception, they are blaming the failures on the deception rather than themselves. And so they're not calling them failures. Here's some word maps. So based on the self-reports. So the interesting thing here is that you got very different results based off of what people reported in real time versus what they reported at the end of the day. So they were both very crucial to the studies. So in real time, you're going to get that information that shows that that's the only time you're going to see people change their mind about things, right? And then at the end of the day, you're going to see, this is when people start talking about deception and start being sort of retrospective about things. So this is hypothesis 5. We went through and counted for evidence of cognitive bias in those self-reports based on the cognitive biases we saw in the pilot study. We saw 119 instances of these small subset of biases. 37% of the participants exhibited at least one of these biases, and there are lots more biases out there. And 87% of these were in a condition where deception was used. So we believe that this suggests that the biases can be induced. Probably going to skip these to make sure we have enough time for questions, but talks about the considerations and limitations as far as internal validity and external validity for the experiment. Trade-offs and lessons learned. We talked a little bit about why we didn't do capture the flag. Realism versus repeatability lines up with external versus internal validity pretty well. Managing human subjects for human subjects research is really difficult. Managing red teamers for human subjects research is even harder because they're trying to find workarounds and break rules. So you can see this quote here: "I've shifted my perspective to more creative attacks not likely considered by those that have set up the lab," right? That's part of their job. So it was a hard task. Let's see. Let's go to the conclusions. So human decision-making is a critical but often overlooked component of cybersecurity. We believe that human subjects research is needed more. Decoys can be an effective technique to impede, detect, and delay cyber attacks. In our study, every participant in a present condition triggered a decoy alert before exploiting a real machine. So it can be a really useful tool. Interestingly, a combination of the presence of and information about deception had the most effect on cyber behavior compared to the control condition. And this counters previous thinking that deception tactics must remain hidden to be effective. Our observations suggest that a more realistic environment would be needed to retest the psychological deception condition. And this is consistent with the results from the pilot study, which were performed on an operational network. The deception measurably increased confusion and surprise in the attackers. And the cognitive biases are prevalent in cyber attack behavior and can be induced to disrupt attacks. So I think I have a future work slide. Do I? Yes. So what else are we working on? So we're working on combining this with artificial intelligence. So we have work on adaptive decoy systems. So the problem here is that manual defenses to cyber attacks are too slow. They don't scale. We don't have enough cyber defenders. So autonomous defenses can react more quickly. So we want to be able to use cyber deception as a basis for adaptive cyber defense. We want to be able to force attackers to be observable using lightweight decoys and automatically manipulate network and decoy state based on observable attacker behavior. We want to optimize actions to skew attacker perception and maximize defender advantage. And we want to inform the utilities, rewards, and models based on the experimental results that we've talked about today. So we have more data analysis that we're doing. So we have more complex measures of success we're looking at. We have the day 2 data where we want to look at how information and presence of deception persists across time. And we need to look at how the cyber task success correlates with cognitive and physiological data. We've been working to design and execute a set of new experiments, ones that are focusing on measuring and intensifying cognitive biases. And I'm also interested in if we have shown that information about deception can be helpful, we need to dig deeper into that and figure out what techniques would you use to inform attackers, how would you deliver that information, and what would the timing be? So there's a lot of questions, research questions that go along with that. We have work on improving reasoning and decision-making of cyber attack defense models to better account for realistic human behavior. So this is tying together that behavioral science, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity. We need to improve our understanding of attacker and defender decision-making, model defender advantage provided with control over the network appearance that deception gives us, and model cognitive biases relevant to cyber operations. And then, you know, the experiment we did gave us a lot of data. The experiment wasn't perfect. It took a long time. It was expensive. It will provide us with a lot of data for a lot of years, but how can we take advantage of events like CTFs to collect useful data? There's a lot of reasons that we didn't think a CTF could give us the data that we needed, but it would be nice to brainstorm if there's a happy medium. And that's it. I would love to take questions.
Thanks, Kim. There are some questions posted.
Yeah.
If you look down at the bottom bar on your screen, you see you should see a little Q&A icon with a 5 on it.
Okay, yes.
And so if you click on that, you'll see the questions over in a separate panel. And as you answer them, you can click on Answer Live to dismiss them.
Okay. Bachelor of Science or Art? I
I think
would
that was the participants, yeah.
I don't know if we specifically asked them what their bachelor's degrees were in. I do have some, let me see, I have a slide on their experience.
And just to clarify a little bit more of my question, I'm not profiling. I am actually really curious about different aptitudes that come from different fields that may make a red teamer more effective than others. So that's, you know, that's kind of part of the question.
I gotcha. Okay.
And also approaches, because STEM fields tend to be more logical and streamlined in their process. We know a lot of the people that do red teaming, especially the ones that work for contractors, they don't even have degrees. And in many cases, they're very creative, but sometimes this randomness actually is beneficial to that process. I've seen it go both ways. So I'm kind of curious if you have also observed something, if you have observed certain patterns.
I don't think I have any information, more information on the degrees. I have, let me see what I have in my slide deck. I have this information about their level of expertise in different areas of that are task relevant. And then what else do I have? Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at exactly how we worded the question.
Okay, thank you. That would be really interesting.
What makes them believe that process is impeded because of decoys, because they are decoys versus because there is bigger workload? Oh yes, that's a very good question. That is definitely something that is true. So like so for example, when you scan a network with decoys in it, if it has 50 real machines and 50 decoys, then versus you scan a network with 50 real machines, it's going to take a lot longer to scan the one that has 100 things in it than the one that has 50 things in it. And that's a very good point. And so our usual response to that is, yes, that's true, but that's also part of what decoys do. And so decoys get credit for that. But I think your point is that isn't really deception. And I think it sort of depends on which which measurement of success you're using. And I think that you're onto something as far as like if we were only looking at amount of time to do something, or if we were only looking at, you know, how many bytes they sent to something. But I think when you piece together all of the different evidence pieces we had, I think it makes a pretty good story.
Yeah, either time per target, or the other thing is, you know, have X amount of targets, but then you change the proportion of decoys versus proportion of real machines or actual systems. That may be a cleaner test.
Yeah, we did when we were doing the experimental design, we had to make the decision about, you know, do we do 50 decoys on top of the 50 real machines, or do we cut it in half? Either way, there was an argument for it and an argument against it. And when we talked to our experimental design experts, we opted to go with the one that was more realistic as to how you would do it in practice. And so we went for the adding more decoys onto the real machines.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and just feedback on the fact that when you taught people there are decoys, they tend to focus on them. Personally, this is not based on other people in surveys, but personally, I would probably spend more time on the decoys because I would be curious to understand more how they work. So that would not be very, at least for me, it wouldn't be very realistic, because I literally will go after the decoys just because I'm curious.
Yes, and that is a potential, I forgot what the effect is called, but it's basically the effect you see because you're in an experiment that you wouldn't see in the real world. And I think that could be something that we see also. And we are not controlling for background. We had everyone was a US citizen in this case.
Yeah, and I'm assuming also race here, because, you know, people can be US citizens and raised somewhere else.
Right. I don't remember if that was one of the demographic questions we were asking or not. I know our IRB definitely threw out some things we wanted to ask because they didn't think it was relevant, and I'd have to go back and see which they were. I know we had asked for like smaller bins of ages, and they were like, you don't need to know that, and they made our age bins really, really big, for example.
Got it. Yeah, because I definitely have seen difference, even looking at CTF teams. Different CTF teams from different cultures approach things differently. So I'm sure this would translate here as well.
Yeah, I'm sure it would.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. Any more questions?
Well, that's great. And you fit it in the time, so that's especially good. Of course, your entire talk was on a made-up subject, right? This was all fictional.
I'm not really here.
Yeah, all those numbers are artificial, but actually, I think that's great. For the people who are listening in, if you are interested, we have a follow-up panel that will be beginning in just a few moments from various employees at the National Security Agency who do research, this being one of them, who will tell you about what it's like to work there and some of the interesting kind of research environment that exists. So if you are interested in joining that, it's not a continuation of this Zoom session. You're going to have to quit out of this and join to a new link. And Mike, could you post that in the chat?
Yeah, links on the chat. And it's also, you can go to the CERIAS website and go to our seminars, and you'll find a link to it there too.
Great. And so we will rejoin Kim over there in just a few minutes. And thank you very much.
Thanks.
So see you there.